Good afternoon, Lewis, and thank you very much for taking the time to be part of this session this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Joe. Good afternoon.
Excellent. And I think what we wanted to try and do from today, Lewis, is really to talk about, I know your role within the CPA with respect to sustainability. Clearly, we've announced our partnership with ESG Pro, and really just to sort of talk through some of the background and some of the things that we'll be looking forward in the future. Does that sound okay?
Yep, sounds good.
I think for our audience, you'll hopefully improve your understanding on environmental and social and governance, sometimes referred to as ESG, and with particular interest within the sort of plant hire and construction sector. We're going to talk about the partnership between CPA and ESG Pro, and then really we'd like to try and hopefully give you some ideas on the sort of competitive advantage this can present to you going forward as a business. And then really, I'll talk about how ESG Pro potentially can help some of the members if they wish to have any extra support. Does that sound okay, Lewis?
Yep, sounds perfect.
Good. Well, look, if you don't mind me asking you a question to start off, Lewis, I know you've written just recently, I think it was November the 25th, I saw an article and there was some other bits and pieces, but from a climate change point of view, your role within CPA and the way that you support your members, could you give everybody just a high-level overview?
Yeah, of course. Construction Plant Hire Association is the largest trade association of its kind in the UK. We represent the hirers of construction equipment. That covers all types, from generators, cranes, excavators, dumpers, rail plant, you name it, we cover it. And those businesses they're often a blind spot in net zero targets. We're quite a niche area, even though we're fundamental to UK economy and construction sector, is quite a niche area. And we just need to make sure that the climate targets take into account the complexities of decarbonising construction equipment and construction plant hire businesses. So my role is quite balanced in that it's not all about getting everyone to switch to electric. It is about providing advice to members on what the targets are, what the different ESG frameworks are, for example, how to comply with those, but also to lobby government to understand our sector and make sure that they factor in this niche area, make sure they don't accidentally cause damage to this sector that they depend on for their housing targets and infrastructure targets, and to also try to come up with some practical solutions for both parties, because we are not at all against decarbonising equipment. That needs to happen, but it's how that happens, and having a phased approach to that.
And I did observe something from the UK Climate Change Committee, I think you made reference to in your document, which was talking about 56% of plant hire equipment to be powered by non-fossil fuels by 2035. So it seemed like quite a bold target to me without the knowledge that you have.
Yes, it is. And I think there's a bit of a game happens between companies and local authorities and public sector organisations of who can do even better than that. So it does sometimes spiral out of control a little bit. But yes, the 7th carbon budget suggests that we need to have 56% of construction equipment powered by non-fossil fuels by 2035 to be on target with the net zero trajectory. Currently, we're at about 1 to 2% of HVO uptake. Most of the diesel contains an element of biodiesel, but that's usually only around 5%. And then electrification, I think we're currently at somewhere around 0.3% uptake. And then hydrogen is also in early days. It's sort of in its inception at the moment. In total, we're probably not even 10% of the way there at the moment, which presents a little bit of a gap with where the net zero targets would like us to be and where we actually are. And as I've discussed in many articles that I've done, there's a lot of economic and practical challenges to plug that gap.
I was going to ask you actually about the main challenges that you believe are there with respect to hitting that target, but other things linked with sustainability in the sector that your members are represented by?
Yeah, I mean, there's how long have you got? There's a lot of challenges. Without getting sort of too much into the weeds, The main ones are cost, obviously, because if the technology is more expensive than diesel, then that increases operating costs, which increases development costs, which increases house prices, which increases inflation. Yeah, so anything that adds cost to standard practice is going to have to be balanced against economic risk. I'm not always convinced that it is balanced properly at the moment, but also infrastructure. So although electric won't be the only route forward, there will be a mix of technologies out there. A lot of the technology, even hydrogen production, everything requires grid access and power. And that is hard to come by at the moment. And we're not really expecting sufficient grid capacity until 2038 onwards. So grid capacity is going to be an extreme limiting factor for the production of low carbon fuels, but also for actually getting a connection on site and plugging in electric machines where they're a viable option.
Yeah, and I would imagine, without being blessed with the amount of construction knowledge that you and your members would have, some of these sites are, they're new builds, right? So the infrastructure probably doesn't even exist because, the EV may be part of the journey, but it's probably, when does that get implemented on these project sites? So I would imagine that's going to be a challenge on those examples as well.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the grid delays, if you've got to wait to start works, you've got to have a grid connection first to use the electric equipment and things, then you might be delaying the project by 18 months or more. Some people are having dates much, much longer than that. It's temporary, so you rip it up afterwards. The construction site needs far more power than the final build usually. You overspec the power requirement, which is an issue that we're also trying to address. And we have guidance documents in the pipeline for that. But it's the amount of grid we would need for the equipment that we'd be using. What we're asking for now is difficult enough, and the average size of a connection is about 70 kVA, if that means anything to you.
Yeah.
But we'd be looking at needing several ultra rapid fast chargers on site. If the HGV deliveries have got to be electric as well, then they might have to top up when they're there. We might be talking an average size of now 500 kVA. So it's massive jump.
Yeah, and I notice just reading, online, looking at CPA, I know that part of a significant amount of work that you do with respect to lobbying government. I'd just be interested to know, how's that going?
It's mixed. It's all going forwards. I think with different departments, it's going forward at different rates. It's fair to say. I think we have now managed to get public sector into a space of acknowledging that there are going to be some serious hurdles along the way, and it is now a case of, well, okay, what can we do then? You've put the case forward of what we can't do, so what are our alternatives? And we will have to provide them with alternatives. Otherwise, they will say, well, if there's no alternative, we'll carry on with what we're doing. Because I don't think they can afford to abandon the targets entirely, at least not at the moment.
Yeah, interesting. I know that, on one hand, you're connecting with government bodies, understanding and shaping the narrative there. And on the other hand, I know with the 2,000 members, I think 95% of those are SMEs. So I'd be very interested to hear how your dialogue with your membership is going in respect, certainly the SMEs. You talk about funding as an access barrier to this. So how are those discussions going with the SMEs?
Yeah, it's a challenge. It is a cost and administrative pressure that a lot of them cannot take at the moment. So you are sometimes talking, 5-figure sums for consultancy fees to get a handle on all of this stuff. We've got 45% of our membership has got a turnover of less than 450k. That's turnover, not profit. So the sort of cash available in these companies is not going to cover that. It's definitely not going to cover employing an extra member of staff to manage all of this, which is what really would be required to get a grasp on all of that. So it is a very much seen as a bit of a expensive chore.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and with when we look at, we've been discussing, most of the conversation so far is about the environmental aspects, the E with the ESG. Just be intrigued, or, when you're connecting with your members, I know that the weighting towards social and governance is elevating. with respect to decision making and what key people are asking for now. How do you find that sort of level of engagement with the membership generally about, ESG? Have they heard of it? Does it sound like a daunting subject to them? How do you find the engagement with the members on ESG?
It's certainly a daunting subject. It is a really broad subject. I don't
Yeah.
think we should forget that. It's when you're talking about environment, social, and governance, that is basically all of your problems wrapped up into one. It is an all-encompassing topic. So it is a very broad thing to try and get your head around. It can be very daunting to look at. I know that from first-hand experience. My background is dealing with exhaust pipes, and engine labeling and construction sites. So sort of on the ground activity. So when I first had to dive into all of the back office side of ESG and the social value side of things, that was very daunting and still is to a degree. So but I think a lot of what is in there, the companies will already be doing most of the time. So people do recruit locally for local firms. There is social value just embedded in the business already. It's just a case of explaining that and putting that into a language that procurement will understand, so that the person that's receiving their tender application will know that they already do this.
So we're going to move the conversation now on to things that have changed this year that are impacting certainly with sort of bids and tenders. I know with the Procurement Act, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, Lewis, because I know you've got your thoughts and feelings on some of the areas there. But there was a shift. It talked about a top line budget in the realms of sort of 400 billion and a commitment to award 30% of that to SMEs. But they wanted to move the decision-making process from what was framed as to the most economically advantageous tender. So clearly there was a focus on cost, to moving that to the most advantageous tender, and as part of that, looking to build in some element of supporting ESG initiatives. And I know also that the prerequisite was to have the carbon reduction plan, which would meet the sort of UK government PPN 006 standard. So before we talk about that, Lewis, do you just want to share your sort of thoughts on what that standard means and the challenge for your members?
Yeah, I mean, PPN 06 in particular it feels very one-sided in the authority's favour, in that it requires you to set a net zero target, which I'm not sure I agree with at the moment. A controversial view, but that is my view, because it's too difficult to know whether you will be able to hit net zero at this stage. It's also asking for a 2050 net zero promise on a contract that expires in 2032 doesn't feel like it's going to be valuable. So to me, it's not asking for something that is relevant to that contract. And it's a system that's quite easy to abuse, I think. It also excludes a lot of carbon savings from the activities of the contract itself, and it puts quite a lot of the onus on the business to improve their carbon footprint in general in their own operations for deliveries and the running of their own facilities, for example, which, yes, is important, but I feel like there should be some give and take. There should also be a commitment to pay more for the environmental services and the like. And the thing that worries me, as you said earlier, the change in the wording of from economically advantageous to environmentally advantageous. The economical considerations are not gone away. They're still going to be cost conscious.
Yep.
And I think time will tell how much that wording change actually translates into practice.
Yeah, I mean, there is talk, I think we've spoken before about in the sort of B2C, the business to consumer environment, that consumers will pay sometimes up to 9% more for a greener product, and they make that choice as part of the decision making. Wouldn't it be lovely if contracts were being won and you could put the premium on that environmental aspect? That would be lovely, but it's probably not there at the moment. But that would be lovely to recognise the contribution investment that people are making. There's talk of extended contracts. There's talk of shared investment in innovation. I've not yet seen that coming through this year, but hopefully as time goes on and people recognise these barriers, those things will become more apparent. I'd like, when we're looking at sort of ESG, the environmental, social, and the governance, really to just talk about together, if you don't mind, just where the potential benefits could be. Because I know sometimes I spend a lot of time talking with SMEs across multiple sectors. There's quite often this well, one, that sort of understanding as to what it is. And the second thing is that the big question, like why now? Why do we need to do this? So yeah, I'm a firm believer of the triple bottom line, which is the Harvard Business Systems mantra, which is the three, which is planet, people, profit. And I generally believe that if you get the three things together, it's far more dynamic than just looking after the planet or looking after your people or just worrying about bottom line profit. So that's my experience. But yes, I mean, from your point of view, that's sort of why now. What sort of things would you draw out from the why now for your members around ESG?
We're seeing people start to be required to provide certain information in bids for work and in long-term contracts with local governments. So people are starting to be forced, not everyone, but it is trickling down the supply chain from big contracts, big infrastructure jobs, the likes of NHS long-term contracts, highways maintenance, things like that. So it's starting to be forced, and although we don't agree with every requirement within those contracts, it's important for our members to be able to not be excluded from those contracts. So hence why we wanted to set up the ESG Pro partnership, is to provide members with access to that expertise on hand when they need it. Because a lot of the time they don't see these things coming. They apply for a job and suddenly someone says, "Where's your carbon management plan?" or whatever it is they're asking for.
Yeah. And of course, then even with that, the prerequisite is to have it front of house on the website as well as embedding it into the frameworks. And I think I've spoken with some companies within the construction centre that were generally feeling they weren't getting as much, the PQQs coming in at the beginning of the process. And I think sometimes when potential customers are looking at you on the website, they want to make a decision 5, 10, 15 seconds, whether you're an organisation that they want to connect with a view to competing for business. So the great thing that I always talk about is trying to make things front of house. Talk about what you're doing. Don't be scared. We'll certainly try and help the membership with not overstating or understating. Make sure everything is on point, because people worry about things like greenwashing. But I also know in discussions with the SMEs, invariably they're not regulated to the same level that their key clients are. But really the way it's moving now, your point about the supply chain, if it's not your priority, but it's your customer's priority, it will become your priority. And certainly those large organizations that are regulated are starting to be challenged more about the supply chain. And it's moved away just from being the environmentally focused to looking at, social and governance, looking at, modern slavery, looking at bribery and corruption, looking at social value and local community impact, plus the governance, and sometimes is overlooked, the data governance. There's been huge issues. I think every week now we see a major organisation, I think Jaguar was the most recent, nearly shut down because of the cyber threat. And, so those things again are being asked for from the membership. I mean, do you think there's a link, Luis, with respect to how it can help you attract new staff as well? Things like ESG. Do you see that link with your members potentially?
It could do. It's the younger generation. I'm not sure if I still qualify for that or not. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. They do care more about environmental compliance and governance. So it could attract additional staff. Whether it will attract additional fitters and drivers more than additional consultants, it may be a bit one-sided in the type of job that it attracts, but it will have an impact, and it will certainly attract more work.
Yeah.
I think it's just a case of managing the amount that we expect of particularly smaller companies. So like you said, the SMEs aren't as heavily regulated as the big players on these topics, but when you consider the breadth of what they'd have to cover, you have to be careful not to strangle those businesses.
Yeah. And sometimes, I talked about the 3 Ps and I talked about profit earlier, and some of it is there is a there is absolutely an opportunity. You can reduce costs by having a strong ESG agenda. And I know sometimes is it rocket science or pocket science? If you're using less fuel, then there's less cost attached to that. If you're switching off lights, the power consumption and things like that. But also coming back to talent, if you can improve or reduce your attrition rate, then it means you're not having the cost of recruitment with new people. And often the cost that is overlooked is when someone has to train that individual, which takes them away from their core business. And that's often not quantified within that attrition. And I think on the other side, Lewis, building on what you said earlier, was talking around access to funding or potentially the investments in some of this innovation, electrification and alternative fuels. There is a growing opportunity now where people can attract a lower percentage of borrowing interest rate if they can demonstrate and present themselves in a strong ESG light. So I'm definitely seeing that. And I'm definitely seeing a shift towards access to grants as well in being improved if you've got a strong and evidenced proposition around ESG.
Yeah, I think the issue with the grants at the moment is that they're compared to the investment cost for our sector to decarbonise the equipment in particular. They're quite insignificant. When you're talking millions and millions of investment and someone offers you 10 grand grant, it doesn't really touch the sides. But on people, though, you raised a very important point there. The focus on people within the ESG framework and staff retention is an extremely important one for our sector. We're already looking at a shortage with all of the plans that government have for building an infrastructure. Regardless of whether they hit the full number or even half of them, we're going to need a lot more staff. And we're going to need even more if we're also losing staff.
Yes.
And retention in the construction industry is a challenge, especially for example, women. Retention of women in construction is quite poor. So that's something that the industry as a whole, all corners of the industry could do better with. And then, but I just wanted to also sort of touch on, you mentioned that saving, environmentally can often lead to savings with cost. I think sometimes. So yes, it is possible to do that, but it very much depends what the proposal is. Because obviously if you're using less fuel, then yes, you're saving there. But if you've swapped it out for an electric machine that's 3 times the cost and has no residual value at the moment, then actually on balance, it's still probably going to be a big risk. So but there are definitely opportunities around, especially with things like efficiency, solar generation on if you've got a big warehouse and you put lots of solar on the roof, then you can save money over time there. So there are options, but it shouldn't be taken as a granted that if you save the environment, you will also save cost, because quite often it's the reverse. It costs to save the planet.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I've had this dialogue with other clients, is when you're looking at EV, I always suggest do the feasibility study, work out the cost to make the switch, and then the obvious question, how are you going to pay for this and what's the return on investment? And I know I've run my own SME businesses before, and I know sometimes it's not as easy just to sort of overnight make that investment. And, particularly if it's a long-term payback. So that is a challenge for an SME, which we're fully aware of. So I think with the dialogue now, I thought talking earlier on about SMEs in particular, but with your members, I think one of the things that we're hoping for from the partnership is to really help the membership get on the front foot and to be more proactive and dare I say it, not fall victims to losing a bid or a tender because they weren't able to either, if they're doing stuff, articulate it in a way that resonated with the procurement teams, or that they're behind their competition who've got preferential from a supplier point of view. So I think that's really what we're trying to achieve. And I think without going too much into the depths of what we can do, I think we position ourselves as sort of fractional resource, which I think when we've spoken before, Lewis, you thought was great. The guys could check in and check out as opposed to having us on the payroll the whole time. And I know SMEs often have HR at reach. They have payroll at reach. So really those are the sorts of areas that we're looking to bring to the membership. And hopefully from offering, I know you were very much clear with us what could we give them without any investment? So I think we've come up with something from a time point of view to be that sort of, that helpline. So, and something we do help our clients with is if they do get bids and tenders, is that we potentially help them answer the questions that are relative to ESG, not the commercial bit, but just zoning in on that part of it. And we know in certain places, I know in particular things like housing associations, it carries up to a 20% weighting on the decision. So it's very, very important. Anything from your point of view with the partnership and how you'd like to see the members collaborating and engaging, Lewis?
Yeah, I mean it's it's there if they need it. That was our motto for it. Is that people need access to this expertise. I'll admit I haven't got the in-depth knowledge of all of the different frameworks of EcoVadis and the long list of different accreditations for different areas that are out there. So for us, the real value in this membership is going to be helping the members navigate this really broad, complex area. You're able to tell them what they need to do, instead of them having to try to understand 700 different ESG frameworks and apply it to what they've specifically been asked in this bid. And I think it's also brilliant that you guys have set up a few sort of bespoke services that you can offer to members that are specifically related to their needs and plant hire. So that I think is going to be really, really valuable. And I would just encourage any members that are having challenges with ESG to get in touch with you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I know one of the things that we'll be doing is, if we get engagement, is the gap analysis, because you talked earlier, Lewis, about the guys often are doing some good stuff around the social side with, local employment and recruiting locally. So really, sometimes this is about translating what you're doing into something that can elevate and communicate that. So that's often when we get into discussions with people, what they do. Oh, no, we do that. Oh, what about this? Is that any good? And we find that and we just try and help them. And I know one of the things that we do sometimes is help people, not just with the carbon reduction plan, but sometimes you can get like your own little ESG report on an annual basis, because a lot of SMEs don't have a dedicated marketing person. And if they do, that person is very, very good at talking about what they do as a company. But where they really are very nervous is about talking about ESG out into the marketplace, which is an important part. So what we do is help get that message on point that can either be embedded within their own marketing, collateral and report. Alternatively, we help build one for them, at a very sensible price, dependent on whether it's 5, 10 or 50 pages.
And yeah, the going back to the comment on greenwashing, I think that's part of the nervousness of talking about ESG matters.
Yeah.
Is that they've been told, right, you need to set a net zero target and you need to communicate that to us.
Yeah.
And them going, well, how do I do that without greenwashing? Because I have no idea what's going to happen next week, let alone in 25 years' time. So talking to you guys about how to frame that commitment, really, ideally, from CPA's perspective, we'd rather that they weren't required to make that commitment and they were asked to make a commitment that was relevant to the contract period. But in the world we are in, they have to make this commitment. So how do they do it in a responsible way that isn't greenwashing? That sort of thing is gonna be invaluable to them.
Yeah, and that sometimes you're just building the confidence in what you're communicating and what you say. So I do find sometimes people overstate, and I'm always very much not critical, but draw it to their attention, because ultimately that may lose them a customer or lose them an opportunity in a bid and tender. So why should I hold back from sharing something if I'm looking to protect their business interests in the future? So, but I'll do it in a acceptable way. But certainly, we try and give that feedback to help people. So look, before we wrap up, Lewis, with this session, I know there's a lot of work going on with the website and what you're doing there, and I know that's consumed a lot of your time this year. What can the membership expect to see on the website around the subject of ESG going forward?
It's an evolving beast. So we'll have this chat up on the website on the ESG Pro page. So that's got more details about the services that you guys provide as well. So I'd encourage members to go go and have a look. Hopefully they're already there if they're watching this. But we are trying to address issues as they come up. So there's things around the London NRMM off-road emission zone. We've got Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, who are working on an off-road decarbonisation strategy. There is DFT and Network Rail have their sustainability targets. There's lots going on around biodiesel, which we're currently not really allowed to use in off-road engines, but that's all up in the air as well and might be changing in future. We're trying to encourage domestic production of cleaner technologies instead of importing it from overseas, which doesn't really help the domestic economy or energy security. There's a whole raft of stuff. And I think the most significant developments over the next 12 months are probably going to be around power because of those grid constraints, because of the long lead times on that. How sites are powered is going to be probably a big focus.
Yeah, good. I know we've got we'll be at the conference in May, but hopefully we'll get some engagement before May and together. And the partnership is really important to us, and we really feel that we can add value dependent on where your members are on their ESG journey. And hopefully they'll see it as a successful investment of time and, dependent on the services they subscribe to. Then we always make that very relative. So we have a pricing structure that reflects, we've got micro businesses, less than 10 employees. I can think of one electrical contractor that's working with us, just 8 people, 2 million turnover. But his biggest customer, who's 80% of his turnover, said, you need to be an EcoVadis rated business. Otherwise, in January 2020, can't work with you. So that was literally a switch off the business relationship and probably the company, unless they did something. But as I said to him, well, maybe in 2 or 3 years' time, they're not 80% of your turnover. They can be 40%, which gives you a more sustainable business because you'll attract other clients. So that's hopefully what we're going to achieve. But although it's not quite a crystal ball, I can't guarantee it. But hopefully that's the sort of way that we try and reflect our energy and commitment to our clients. So, Luis, anything else before we finish? For anything you want to say to finish?
No, that's summed up everything perfectly for me.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time and look forward to continued engagement and, more importantly, the way that we can complement you with everything you're doing with your membership and add a little bit of support for you, the extra pair of hands around the subject of ESG. But thank you very much for your time and commitment today. Much appreciated.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Joe.